Yeah. Long live anti-fascist solidarity. Long live the anti-imperialist struggle. Long live the vision of a world that belongs to the working people. Yeah. 27 minutes.
I would like to call upon Ranjeet to make his contribution.
Thank you, comrade. Well, good evening, comrades. Greetings. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you here on the 99th anniversary of the great Socialist October Revolution. So much has already been said, and I don't want to repeat too much of it, so I'm sure I will go off-piste and not really deliver the speech that I've prepared for you. But there are a few things I have to say and stand briefly in the way of you, and a beautiful meal is going to come to you shortly, so I hope I can maintain your concentration for a little while. I recently went to speak at a conference, actually. There's a 7th World Socialist Forum in China. And some of the things that people spoke about, and in fact the paper I delivered at that conference, was on the topic of the collapse of the Soviet Union. I'm going to come back and speak a little bit about the glory of the Soviet Union, its impact, why we celebrate it. But it's worth just starting at that point. Because just as it's been an honor, really, I can see how gripped you guys have been by the speeches, and I have too. 2 hours have flown by. I haven't noticed the time go because of the depth and the profundity of the speeches that have been given by my comrades, and I really ask you again to join me around the I remember, I get very emotional speaking about it, to be honest. I remember as a young boy coming and like playing my violin at meetings. So I was, I haven't played the violin for 20 years, so it must have been when I was 15, 14, 13. And Gerry Adams would come and speak at our meetings. That was a time when Gerry Adams had only just been unbanned on the mainland. But when they played him on the news, you still couldn't hear his words. They were considered too powerful, too dangerous, and you'd have some actor speaking in some strange voice over the top of them. So it's true what our comrade Gerry says, that we have been with the Republican struggle when it was dangerous to do so, at times when it was illegal to do so, and we've always stood by our friends in times of trouble. Now we stand with our friends from the DPRK and the north of Korea. It's extremely unfashionable and unpopular to do so. No one likes to remember that the USA, the United Nations and Britain had our part to play, bombed that country, dropped more munitions on the north of Korea than were dropped throughout the whole of the Second World War on that tiny people, and that we had a part to play in the murder of 4 million Korean peoples. That is the genocide that the United States orchestrated, but we are told that the North Koreans are the people who are the violators of human rights. What hypocrisy, what foul lies they're able to perpetrate. But that is the strength of their mass media. That is the strength of the stranglehold they have upon the consciousness of working people. And it's precisely for that reason that who now in Britain, outside this hall and outside our supporters, remembers, honours and cherishes the example of the October Revolution. And yet it means so much to us. Coming back to that conference, we saw the profound and devastating effect that the collapse of the Soviet Union had upon humanity at large, the world socialist movement, had upon people's living standards, upon their expectation that they could have decent health, housing, the basic needs that each one of us struggles to procure for ourselves, our families, our children, that we consider to be a meaningful life. How much, if it wasn't for the example of China on the one hand, Brazil on the other hand, and Venezuela on the other hand, the last period of history would have plunged humanity in the deepest poverty statistics known. China by itself has lifted 200 million people out of poverty. Brazil, something like 60 or 80 million people out of poverty. So, but for these progressive examples, The world capitalist reaction since the collapse of the Soviet Union has, as Stalin predicted it would, seized progressive people by the throat, seized the socialist movement by the throat, and it's our job, if we're ever to lead people out of this crisis of capitalism, to understand both what we gained through October Revolution and socialism, and equally how it was undone, how we've lost it, and where we have to go to get back to that point where we can actually confront the crisis we face and place humanity on a trajectory once more of progress and enlightenment. Our reward for doing so, as Comrade Bobby Sands famously and beautifully said, will be the laughter on the faces of our children. Bobby Sands, James Connolly, Hugo Chavez, Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Kim Il-sung, Mao, Ho Chi Minh. These people are giants. They're not just giants in their own countries, and even by the bourgeoisie of their countries, in some cases, considered as the fathers of their nations. But they are international giants because they represent progress for working people. They represented the revolutionary movement. They represented a new phase and development of human civilization. And each one of them has represented an extension of the first founding movement of the October Revolution. There is not a single country, and this is, I guess, was what I was going to say in my speech, if I can find it. There's not a single country whose life was not affected by the October Revolution, whose movement was not profoundly inspired by the October Revolution. They were 10 days which literally shook the world. And 10 days, let's not forget that Lenin himself at stages did not expect to live to see. When we are surrounded by reaction, when we see imperialism seem so strong, when we see the circus of the presidential election campaign, it's kind of amusing, but at the same time, it can throw you into the slough of despond to see the depths that both sides are able to plumb in the debate. And you say, does this really represent what, the future of civilization, the highest, we're told, power in the world? This is the intellectual heights they've risen to? No. This represents actually the last stage of capitalism at its most decadent, most parasitic, most moribund phase. With the October Revolution and the salvos of the October Revolution, humanity entered a new phase, and we're still living in that phase, and it's very easy sometimes to forget that we're living in that phase when you look at individual isolated events and don't view them as we have done in a much more joined up and historically contextualized truth that we've been presented with from our speeches today. You can forget that we're living in that era, and that era is actually the era of proletarian revolution. It's a strange thing to stand in Britain, in London, and say that. But we're living in the era of proletarian revolutions. There have been many revolutions, but that initial impetus of October Revolution was tremendously profound, and we have to ask ourselves very briefly why that was. And it's because through their intelligence, their audacity, their understanding, they overcome huge obstacles. But they're precisely the obstacles that we face in our lives today. Thanks. They took their specific experience and through understanding it, applying their theory to it, their Marxist understanding to it, they drew general lessons which have been relevant and applicable to every single revolutionary and progressive movement since that time. Because they had theoreticians, propagandists, and agitators that were really second to none, of the caliber of the great Lenin. There are people who had revolutionary fire. They were famous and loved to talk about the Russian revolutionary sweep. More than that, if they could combine their Russian revolutionary sweep with American, they said, capitalist efficiency, then they really had a winning formula. And it's something we still aspire to today. The Russian people faced crisis. They faced poverty. They faced autocracy. They faced feudal backwardness. They faced medieval religion that gripped the mind of their people. They faced capitalist exploitation on top of all that. And Lenin showed in his early works that actually capitalism was blooming in Russia and the working class were becoming a real historical force in Russia, and that Marx's works were relevant to Russia. At every stage of their struggle, they fought actually the same theoretical enemies, the same theoretical backwardness we still encounter in our movement today. Our party is growing, and we've been reading the history of the Communist Party, the Soviet Union, Bolshevik, and it's amazing how many lessons there are that can be directly drawn from those struggles they had with economists who said, you know, you just need a trade union struggle and fight for slightly better conditions. Put this talk of revolution aside. Don't talk to the workers about what they understand. With anarchists who said, well, any kind of organisation's bad. You can't have a party, no leaders. I've still seen journals in our movement today called No Leaders, and you believe it. It's like, as my father likes to say, wishing mourners at a funeral many happy regards of the day. Our movement is profoundly bereft of the deep ideological understanding, and if we can take one thing from the October Revolution, is to actually read some of the works of Lenin's got a collected set of works. Has anyone got one? 45 volumes. Has anyone actually read them?
43.
You've got an old set, mine's 45. 45 volumes. Some of his lesser known works you've been missing out on. 45 volumes. Has anyone actually read 45 volumes? Yeah, I knew that. I think this is probably the only man I know who has read all of them, and all of the works of Marx and Engels and Stalin and Mao. And actually our movement doesn't just have a history of solidarity, it has a profound history of revolutionary theory, experience, leadership, and actual practical struggle. Today we're facing a crisis, the world capitalist crisis of overproduction. Let's call a spade amongst ourselves, that's what it is. What does it mean? A crisis of overproduction. And there's a beautiful quote from Engels, which I've got somewhere. I'm not going to read this, don't worry. He says, and it really describing, because this phenomenon of crisis has been happening since the 1860s, and yet capitalism hasn't seemed to be able to get on top of it, to get over it, despite everything it's tried. And let's not forget that what it's tried has included World War I and World War II, which in themselves, taken in isolation from everything else, have claimed fully 100 million workers they've sacrificed as a blood debt to maintain their system of exploitation and greed. Those wars can only be understood as imperialist wars to redivide the world. And Lenin, in his beautiful pamphlet, The State and Revolution, written at the height of the World War, drew the salient lessons. It drew the salient lessons about imperialism, the salient lessons about how to end war. It wasn't to pass pious resolutions about war on war and then retreat back and vote for the war. It was actually to organise working people and say, your guns don't only point at your fellow working class brothers of other nations. They can also be directed at the bourgeoisie who hold you in subjection and would have you enslave other nations on their behalf. It's funny where you read these quotes. So I was reading a little book, not lesser known book, called Ludwig Feuerbach and the End of Classical German Philosophy. Sounds catchy, but it's beautiful and profound. And Engels in it describes, the crisis of overproduction. He says, tied down by this order, by the narrow limits of the capitalist mode of production, this industry produces on the one hand an ever increasingly proletarianization of the great mass of the people. So great poverty on the one hand. And on the other hand, an ever greater mass of unsaleable products, of wealth concentrated in the hands of such a small number of people that they can't actually sell what they've produced and constitutes their wealth back to the people who so desperately need it. Overproduction and mass misery, each the cause of the other. That is the absurd contradiction which is the outcome and which of necessity calls for the liberation of the productive forces by the means of change of the mode of production. That was very profound. But in the 1860s, in the 1880s when it was written, it could be said that was just a theory. Nice ideas, but really, is there an existence beyond capitalism? Marx was very inspired by the 1871 Paris Commune. He saw in it the seeds of a future society. And in his works regarding that in the Communist Manifesto, Marx not only described what was wrong with capitalism, but he also actually did say how to build a better society, that working people can take possession of the means of production, distribution, exchange, can take power, can smash the old capitalist state, can build a new worker state, can build a new society actually by taking power themselves, not by wishing for it, not by begging the great and the good, not by asking the representatives of a bourgeois parliament, please, Bill Gates, from your foundation, will you distribute a few pennies and maybe we can have a little bit of more of a cure for malaria? No. He said the working people must solve their problems themselves. They can wrest the wealth which they have produced from their own labour. From our own labour. Let's not forget that. The whole thing of trickle-down economics. There's no such thing as trickle-down economics. Wealth flows at the moment uphill. It flows from the masses of the people who produce it through their sweat and toil, through their everyday work. All wealth comes from labour. And it flows... And it flows uphill. And it flows uphill to the hands of a tiny, insignificant minority of capitalists. It does so because they have monopolized the means of production. So the means of producing wealth is in the hands of a tiny number of people. What, more confirmation of these theories do you need than, an Oxfam poster? But the Oxfam posters are given to us out of all context, like it's a terrible thing. If only we made, these rich people pay more tax, I think, the world would be a better place. But actually, how does it come to pass that 62 people, and I could say it again and again, I can never quite believe it, 62 people, 62 of the world's richest billionaires hold in their hands more wealth than half the world's population. That's 3.5 billion people. Of course, 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. Of course, 2 billion people live on less than $2 a day. Of course, 1 billion people don't have their housing net meets. 1 billion people don't drink clean water. People have no access to medicine. People have no access to decent standard of life. We've already heard some statistics from various of our comrades. 11 to 14 million children die of malnutrition and malnutrition-related diseases every single year, from treatable conditions because of the poverty caused by an economic system. And it's not nature, it's not a natural system, it's not free of economic tampering. This laissez-faire economics is enforced at the point of a gun on the world. We are rightly taught to hate the Nazis. I think that's still true. I mean, there's so much moral equivalence that we're not taught them to hate them as much as anyone who's vaguely tried to liberate the world from this capitalist order. But still, the Nazis are held up as generally, bad people. Quite rightly, they were an evil, bloodthirsty empire. But their army, their occupation of the world, its duration and the crimes they committed pale into insignificance in comparison to both the ongoing crimes of US and British imperialism and the group of NATO countries who they surround themselves with.
Yeah.
The fact is there has never been one single day of peace since the end of the Second World War. Reagan, when he was particularly keen to undermine the Soviet Union in his new propaganda offensive, when already Khrushchevite revisionism was meeting him halfway and undermining the Soviet Union, went into an overdrive of hyperbole. But he also promised us there would be a peace dividend. Do you remember that? A peace dividend after the collapse of the Soviet Union. What happened to that much vaunted peace dividend? 5 million Congolese people at a conservative estimate have died because US multinationals want to extract coltan so they continue to manufacture chips that can sustain high temperatures to make our PlayStations and our iPhones go. In fact, it was the launch of the PS2 which was the trigger for a new wave of violence unleashed upon the people of the Congo. How many people are really aware of that fact? What a sick and parasitic system we live in. $4 million Iraqis. Yugoslavia, dismembered. The people of West Africa constantly reinvaded, whether it's Sierra Leone for their diamonds, or whether it's the Gold Coast for their cocoa production. Constant war to enforce economic slavery. They openly admitted themselves. In fact, the scions of the multi-rich actually make documentaries, mainly intended for each other, basically saying they can't quite believe they're getting away with it. Wouldn't it be better actually to be a bit nicer to people? Isn't it a bit an unstable world we're breeding? They can see it. When are the vast masses of workers in a country like Britain going to catch on? Well, the reason they don't catch on are several-fold. They have such a good friend in this country as social democracy, as the Labour Party. Conrad talked about the history of the First World War. The First World War not only brought the conflagration, but brought the October Revolution and brought the Easter Rising of 1916 that we heard about in such inspiration. It was an imperialist war which had some key lessons. One of the great key lessons was that it wasn't a mystery that the war suddenly came. The socialist parties could see it was happening. From 1916, 1914, back before that, 1912, 1911, they'd met in several congresses, international congresses, and said, a war is coming. Imperialism breeds war. It's coming. We can see it's coming. When the war comes, we'll fight against it, and we'll sideline it, we'll get rid of it. These were the parties of the Second International. The Labour Party actually wasn't a member of this international. But these parties, when it came to the war, they found the pressure so overwhelming. I don't know if many of you remember, for example, the pressure after 9/11. Remember 9/11 happened? There was one guy, I think from the Nation of Islam, standing outside saying the chickens have come home to roost. Did any of you see that?
I heard Ambassador Peck on an interview yesterday. Did anybody else see him or hear him? He was on Fox News. This is a white man, and he was upsetting the Fox News commentators to no end. He pointed out, you see him, a white man, he pointed out, an ambassador, that what Malcolm X said when he got silenced by Elijah Muhammad was in fact true. America's chickens are coming home to roost. We took this country by terror away from the Sioux, the Apache, the Arawak, the Comanche, the Arapaho, the Navajo. Terrorism. We took Africans from their country to build our way of ease and kept them enslaved and living in fear. Terrorism. We bombed Grenada and killed innocent civilians, babies, non-military personnel. We bombed the black civilian community of Panama with stealth bombers and killed unarmed teenagers and toddlers, pregnant mothers and hard-working fathers. We bombed Gaddafi's home and killed his child. Blessed are they who bash your children's head against a rock. We bombed Iraq. We killed unarmed civilians trying to make a living. We bombed a plant in Sudan to pay back for the attack on our embassy, killed hundreds of hard-working people, mothers and fathers who left home to go that day not knowing that they never get back home. We bombed Hiroshima, we bombed Nagasaki, and we nuked far more than the thousands in New York and the Pentagon, and we never batted an eye. Kids playing in the playground, mothers picking up children after school, civilians, not soldiers, people just trying to make it day by day. We have supported state terrorism against the Palestinians and black South Africans, and now we are indignant because the stuff we have done overseas is now brought right back into our own front yards. America's chickens are coming home to roost. Violence begets violence. Hatred begets hatred. And terrorism begets terrorism. A white ambassador said that, y'all, not a black militant. Not a reverend who preaches about racism.
And a country which invades another can never itself be free. Why do you think that the United States, why do the people of the United States imagine that if you go around the world, they've actually got an army which is divided up according to continents of the world. Nazis didn't have that. They've got a North America, South America, European, Asia, Africa division. That's how they organize their army because as far as they're concerned, the entire world is theirs to police. They've aggregated that themselves, that role. But our socialist movement saw the writing on the wall. It saw war was coming. But those parties proved not to be up to the task of opposing their own imperialists. And those parties from the Second International have played a role ever since of being a loyal opposition within the ranks of the working class. And the Labour Party came to head them because the Labour Party was ahead of them. The Labour Party from its inception declared that it was there to be a loyal opposition, representing the interests of workers in Parliament, never going beyond the limits of Parliament. How very different from the ideas of Marx, which were brought to fruition in the Soviet Union. Marx said in the Communist Manifesto, "We communists are criticised because we seek to do away with private property." In fact, we don't seek to do away with all private property. We don't want to take away people's personal effects. We don't want to take away their places where they live. What we're talking about is the means of production, those means of producing wealth for the vast masses. And Marx answered this. He said, the bourgeoisie claim we seek to abolish their private property. That is so. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property, but in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. And if it was 10 and 90, well, you can be sure in reality it's much more like 0.001% of the world who are the haves and the vast majority who are the haves-nots. This is something that the Occupy movement have got profoundly right. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In a word, you reproach us with intending, messieurs the bourgeoisie, these 62 billionaires, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what we intend. There are many things I want to say about the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union went on to build socialism and provide a practical example to workers that it was possible to destroy the old and build the new. The Soviet Union, through its defeat of the 14 powers who invaded in the War of Intervention, showed it was possible for a working people who had not had arms in their own hands previously to seize hold of the arms of their oppressor and use them to defend their sovereignty, their right to exist, and to do so and create a stable and lasting workers' state. The Soviet Union turned Russia, which was a notorious hangman of revolution, which was a notorious prison of nations, into its very opposite. It solved the national question through promoting equality, through promoting brotherhood, through promoting great unity in struggle, through saying there is no such thing as a backward or colonial people fitted only for agricultural labour, through saying that every person is capable of mastering the heights of scientific knowledge and the heights of industrial technique. It was possible to have even development, to start to abolish the differences between town and countryside, between oppressor nation and oppressed nation, between men and women, between freemen and serf, which had been so recently the case in Tsarist Russia, let's not forget. And on the basis of this, to go on and build a new culture, a bright civilization with a bright future which stood on its own feet, not exploiting other nations, and to do so on a huge territory of the earth. And that is why that revolution was the inspiration for so many peoples around the world. There are a couple of small points I'll make. I do want to end. We must eat soon. And you have really listened to a lot of fantastic speeches, but still it's tiring after a while. But the great thing about the Bolsheviks, which we must learn, I think, is that they said it was incredibly important to educate the masses of the working people politically, to allow them to gain benefit from everyday exposures of the activities of their political oppressors, of the political classes in society. And through these everyday exposures, enlighten them, take the blind away from their eyes, and let them see that they are capable of building a better world. There's a beautiful, it's a short article really written by Lenin. It's called "What Are Our Ministers Thinking About?" And it was about the Tsarist persecution of school teachers. He said, why are our ministers persecuting school teachers? And through systematic exposure, in this short article, he showed how they were how they were starved of education, starved of knowledge, illiterate population, downtrodden. And today, really, we're fed with misinformation rather than kept from being able to read and write. But so many of our educational institutions are starved of funds, are starved of resources, and certainly are starved of a sense of, our children are starved of a sense of their own potential and ability to intervene and change in the world. And more sync schools are created, which are more like custodial facilities than they are centres of learning, fitting working people to take their destiny and future in their own hands and change so many of the urgent and pressing problems of the world. And he concluded that the autocracy, the oppressors, and it absolutely can be transferred to modern-day imperialism if you certainly look globally and even in our own country, that schools must be kept as far away as possible from the common working people. Workers, you see how mortally terrified are our ministers at the working people acquiring knowledge. Show everybody then that no power will succeed in depriving the workers of class consciousness. Without knowledge, the workers are defenceless. With knowledge, they are a force. Our party exists in an imperialist country, in the belly of the beast, if you like. Our movement is at a low ebb precisely because of the deadening hand of social democracy has had for 100 years, really telling working people, you don't have to struggle, you don't have to fight. You can get a few more crumbs from the table and things will be okay. Things will come to pass and it'll be all right in the end. This capitalist crisis is killing that dream and that hope and that ambition of social democracy. And it's interesting to see how working people in our country are casting around for alternatives. They've tried the avenue of different forms of nationalism, whether it's Scottish nationalism, and we'll see what that will deliver them. It will deliver them nothing. British nationalism will deliver them nothing, whether it's in the form of the BNP, come and gone, UKIP, come and going, or any other form. We've seen now people think, well, actually, there's a lot of people who have been going on about reclaiming the Labour Party for a long time. Now, in reality, you can't reclaim something that was never yours in the first place. So we think this is a misnomer. But okay, let's say you can switch the Labour Party in a vehicle for bringing about the interests of workers' needs. And surely Corbyn is doing a good job of that. Let's put aside the fact that Corbyn for more than 30 years has sat in Parliament that has waged war after war, has sat in a party that's waged war after war. Let's say he was against it, it wasn't his fault. We called on him if he really represented the things he said, peace, anti-nuclear disarmament, for nuclear disarmament, getting out of Europe, giving working people a better life, that he should leave a party which didn't stand for any of those things. But he's stuck it out there, and now he's there, and what do you know? As people are casting around for some desperate measure that can save the system without having to have a revolution. Even the American Constitution says that people don't enter upon the revolutionary path lightly. They do so when every other avenue has been exhausted. And there's a truth contained in those words, written regardless who it was written by and in whose constitution it stands. That's true. So people are thinking, maybe we can get Corbyn. Maybe we can put him at the centre of the Labour Party and we can raise it up. But there is, and we will find as we progress, there is no shortcut. There is no way around the fact that without addressing the inequality in wealth, if 7 billion can be passed from the 6th Duke of Westminster to the 7th Duke of Westminster without paying any tax, but when your mother or father dies, or indeed needs a care home, all the wealth they've managed to accumulate in their world will be liquidated. Some go to the tax man, the other go to pay their bill, and you're in poverty. Each generation of workers' labour makes the capitalists richer and the workers sink down deeper into crisis and poverty, there can be no solution to crisis, poverty and war under capitalism. And much as you might admire Jeremy Corbyn for trying to do something different, you might think he's a man of integrity or principle, there's no getting away from these hard, cold facts. That without, you can't use the bourgeois state to affect the aims of working people. We've learned the lesson of Chile, we've learned the lesson of the Paris Commune, and above all, we've learned the lesson of the October Revolution. I'm going to finish. There's so many things that I haven't been able to say that I wanted to say, but that such is life. What I would like to do is to appeal to all of you. Our party is growing, and there are many signs that our party and our movement is growing. When I was in the World Socialist Forum in Italy, in China, an Italian spoke, and he said, at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, we had 1.8 million members, and we dissolved ourselves. So numbers are not everything. The Chinese make great play of the fact they have 80 million members, and they love to ask us what our membership was, and I generally give the answer that Comrade Keith gave, and he said, well, we have less members than you have now, but we have more members than you had when you founded your party. And that's likely to be a formula that we can repeat, really, for the end of history, as our country has less people in it than their party. So it's a good one. But our party is growing, and our movement is coming back. Now parties that presented there, it was increasingly clear that none of them, despite all of the resurgence in the movement, had quite come to terms with the collapse of the Soviet Union in the way that our party has. And I haven't been able to go into any of the details of those, and I'm not going to start now, because it's long. But without that understanding, it's very difficult to reassert that communism has the answers. Communism holds the way future. Communism is capable of building a bright society. And it means looking at specifics. And we have a society, the Stalin Society, which actually celebrates and makes a study of learning. What were the things that were done correctly? How can we learn from them? What were the things that went wrong? How was socialism undone? And the answer in a nutshell is Khrushchevite revisionism, but I can't take it beyond that point in this speech. Our party is growing. It's growing precisely because we have these answers. We have this confidence. We have the revolutionary optimism to take our message to young working people up and down this country. And actually we've got to the point where we are overwhelmed by the number of people who are joining our party. And, if you're going to clap anything, you should clap that, really. But it raises difficulties. Despite that, we're still at a frighteningly low level of organisation. We have young people who have time but no money and no political experience. We have older people who have political experience and they have some money, not a lot, but less time and less energy. And we've got to bring those elements together in a meaningful way. Our party has created a cadre development committee to kind of address this problem. And one of the ways we've done it is actually getting full-time party cadres. And at the moment we have two, and they're comrades Dan, put your hand up, don't be shy, and comrades Ed. I'd like to formally acknowledge the work they've been doing. But this is a program that has to be expanded. They live on a pittance. You wouldn't envy them their existence, other than the fact that they can truly say that their labour is a gift to future society. That their gift is the greatest gift, if you like, the gift to the liberation of mankind. And I mean that in a very sincere and humble way. But we have to find a way to support them. And I want to make an appeal to all of you to dig deep into your pockets and help support the party financially, as well as supporting us with your time. If you can attend study classes, and it's a simple formula. And again, there are parallels with the October Revolution. October Revolution started out with study circles, groups of revolutionary students who went to the towns and the countryside as well and tried to make contact with working people, educate them and raise them to political consciousness. And that deep bond of getting deep roots amongst the masses, no revolution can be made without the working people. But equally, no revolution can be made without the revolutionary theory and consciousness that we're trying to impart to the British people. We have many of the answers, we really do. We put a lot of work into it, a lot of time into it. I'd appeal to everyone here who is not already involved with the party to become involved with the party. I'd appeal to everyone here who is not giving financially to the party to give financially to the party. I know there's a practice of certain churches which are so popular. You wonder how these churches can be so popular. They go to their people, working people, humble people, honest, hard-working people, and they say to them, we have a practice that, God will bless you if you give us a tithe. You know what that is? 10%. 10%. We want 10%, not half. We want 10%. 10% of the income of a working person is a great deal to ask. And it means that these churches, these pastors who prey upon their, working class, parishioners, they live like kings. They swan around in BMWs, they fly in private jets, and they enjoy great luxury at the expense of the masses who they, treat to demagogy, but also treat like fools. We're not going to treat your money in that way, and we're not asking for a tithe. But we would ask you seriously, on the back of we're going to sing the Internationale in a moment, and on the back of your hymn sheet you'll find a standing order form. And it's a standing order form that I'd like you guys to fill in. I would feel ashamed. Normally British people feel ashamed of asking each other for money. We don't like to ask even, what do you earn? Because property is theft and it's all a bit uncomfortable. But Lenin said, no revolution, no working class that can't fund its own revolutionary organization deserves liberation. The capitalists have all the money. This country is awash with money. It's absolutely awash with money, and it's owned by a tiny group of parasites who live in the city of London. And they use their capital, which is the labour of generations past, to leech vampire-like from the present generations. And that will continue in perpetuity, generation after generation, until we stop it from happening. We can only stop it from happening through organisation, and we can't build an organisation unless we can fund ourselves and go amongst the masses and recruit the best elements to our party. So I'm going to end my speech there. I'm going to say to everyone, please, if you join me in standing and giving a salute to the great Socialist October Revolution and all that is inspired since. So if I could ask comrades to come among you, and you've all got the forms. If you find in your bank card, you'll find all your bank details. If you think you don't have your bank details with you, even £5 or £10 a month from each of you will make a huge difference to what we can do. But all of you, please, before we sing the Internationale, if we can just also get a cash collection from you to help cover the cost of the meeting and our organisational expenses. And comrades, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an inspiring meeting. And if you need any proof that our movement is on the rise, we actually got a group of documentary filmmakers, admittedly students, where they're making a short film on the rise of the left-wing movement. No doubt fringe movement, but still the left-wing movement in Britain today. So, comrades, thank you very much for coming.
The Chinese song.
Long live the October Revolution.
Chinese song.
Let's have the collection first.
Yeah, okay.
So if we have the collection, and then Jackson's going to sing a song, and we're going to sing the Internationale. Thank you.
7 million who lost their breath, so the world can live free after all of this debt. Wanna falsify history, skew it, pervert it, nullify, taint it, change it, revert it. They put Joseph Stalin on par with Hitler, but nothing could really be more sinister. Equating a fascist Nazism, which was really a desperate capitalism, compared with the world's first worker state that fought against racist and sexist hate. The aim to emancipate man from man, with the overthrow of Tsarism it began. But as soon as they made the Great Revolution, imperial powers were out to maneuver. 14 countries encircling Russia, still they prevailed over every last one of them. Onwards we moved to the Great Depression. The world's economic crisis had threatened bosses everywhere, people inspired to have their very own communist uprising. So all these governments attempted to crush them, Churchill and Mussolini, Hitler among them. Now we have a point, it's usually lost in the rewrite of history you won't come across. The US, Britain and France supported fascist Germany with all of its torture, all of its savagery, all its aggression, hoping it would step in the Russian direction. But Stalin was not a man to ever be fooled. He created a strategy to greatly improve